We're going to talk about a variety of topics today, but one that I'm really excited about is talking about how we have a God who is fiercely committed to us. He is so devoted to us. We're talking like covenant devotion. And it's really cool how the story of Isaac and Rebekah reflects that. And we're also going to talk about Jewish eschatology. Who can tell me what eschatology is? Yeah, like the eschaton in Greek is the end, right? So eschatology is talking about the end of days, about things that are going to happen at the culmination of history, right before Messiah comes back and assumes the throne of David in Jerusalem. So we're going to look at some fun stuff like that. Let's look at 2 Peter first. If you want to turn to 2 Peter. As you could hear in the translation that we were reading, it had some of the original Hebrew names for these apostles. So Simon Peter in Hebrew is Shimon. Everybody say Shimon. Shimon is like, it was the Jewish name of that time. I think there are 9 different Shimons in the New Testament. I'm going to do a little overview of the Hebrew names of people in the apostolic scriptures. Yeah, and I counted them, so that's how I know that. Peter is from the Greek Petros, which means rock. The Aramaic, which is very close to the Hebrew name for this guy, is Kefa. Everybody say Kefa. You remember sometimes he was called Cephas? Yeah, well, that Cephas is from Kefa, the Aramaic word for rock. So if you can imagine a guy named Rocky, in Greek you'd call him Petros, and in Aramaic you'd call him Kefa. That was the nickname that Yeshua gave this apostle. He basically named him Rocky. So this is a letter from Rocky to the faithful. Like, that's the idea, right? We say Peter or whatever, and we don't have a clue what it means in their language, but that's what it means. It's like Simon the Rock. So we're gonna hear from the Rock today.
Caiaphas was also the high priest.
That was a different name, but it might have been related. Yep. He defines himself here as a bond servant, and that has the connotation of slave. He's like a slave of the Messiah, which is really cool, but it also has the connotation of the type of servant that's defined in the Torah. You remember there's a special ritual. If you want to serve someone for your whole life because you're so devoted to that person, then you go through a special ritual. And that's what we're talking about here. When we get to that passage in the Torah, we'll read about it, and then we'll understand what was in Shimon Kefa's mind here. Okay, there's a word that I've wondered for years what it meant. When I was growing up, in an evangelical church, it's the word godliness. I can't say I ever really connected with that word. Like, it was a really good sounding word, when it talks about it, but I don't feel like I ever really connected with that word. Like, I understood the concept of godly. It's, to me, to say someone's godly is a great compliment. Like, he's a really godly man. It's like he's really tight with the Almighty. Maybe he exudes characteristics of God, but I really kind of wanted to know what that word meant. And so I did a word study on it this last week. And I want to share with you some of my findings. Maybe it'll help this word come to life for us. The reason I wanted to bring it up today is because in chapter 1, verse 3, he talks about godliness. He talks about how the power of God has given us everything we need to live a godly life, to practice godliness. And, wow, second time. And I lost my bookmark for the second time. And interestingly enough, if you're reading the books of the apostolic scriptures in their original manuscript order, then this is the first time this term is mentioned. And I'm really big on the law of first mention. The first time something's mentioned, it's really important, so we want to dig in. So let's have a look at this term together. You know how a couple weeks ago we talked about how the authors of the New Testament, we have the Bible in English, right? It came to us usually translated from the Greek manuscripts, but you're dealing with a bunch of Jewish people who wrote the New Testament. So they thought in Hebrew terminology. That was their theological language. That was their heart language. It was the language they prayed in. It's the language they read the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible in. And so when we see a term, it's good to look at the Greek and understand the Greek, but also to retro-translate back into the Hebrew and ask what were they saying in Hebrew and how does that fit into the thought pattern of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible. So we're going to do that with this word. I brought a couple of my translations again. We're gonna spend some time with the sages, some of the pioneers of the Messianic Jewish movement here, and we're going to see what they have to say about this word in Hebrew, and also what it says in Greek. Let's look at the Greek first. The Greek word for godliness is it's Strong's number 2150, and it's only used in this letter, and in a couple of Paul's letters, and once in the book of Acts. So it's not actually used very much. And it's the word eusebia. Everybody say eusebia. That's like godliness or whatever. And here's the passage from Acts chapter 3. It'll give you a better understanding of eusebia. It's when Peter and John heal the lame guy, and everybody's like, wow, and they're all crowding around them in the temple. And then we read, but when Peter saw this, he replied to the people, men of Israel, why are you amazed at this? Or why are you staring at us as if by our own power or our own eusebia we had made him walk? And here in the New American Standard, it's translated as piety, our own power or piety, we made him walk. This word eusebia, it comes from Strong's 2152, eusebias. And that word means like godly or devout or like pious, practicing piety. Okay? Did you hear that? Devout. One of the translations of this word is devout. So godliness has something to do with like being devoted to God, practicing devotion. This is interesting. I have a couple of my versions here. Here's like the Aramaic Peshitta text of the New Testament. It's what the Eastern Church has read. Some scholars would believe that it's actually the original manuscripts and the Greek was a translation of it. We won't go there today, but it is interesting to note it. The Peshitta here has this word as where is it? Yirat Elohim, the fear of God. Then we have Isaac Zalkinson, a pioneer Messianic Jew from the 1800s. He wrote a very poetic version of the New Testament in Hebrew. He has the word Yirat Shamayim, the fear of heaven here. But the one that I like most is Delitzsch. I think Delitzsch is onto something here. Again, he was like a Christian Hebraist from the 1800s. He rendered this word as Chasidut. Can you say Chasidut? It's like ut on the end of a word means a state of being, right? So like I am in, because I'm an Abba, I'm a father, I am in a state of Abbahut, being an Abba. You can hear the ut on the end, right? So Chasidut means being a Chasid in Hebrew. What is a Chasid? That is where things get really cool, because this Torah portion is where that Hebrew term chassid first comes up. And I want to go there. Have any of you heard the term like chassid before? Have you ever heard of Hasidic Jews, the Hasidic movement? Yeah, I mean, it's a term that most people know, hey? What most people don't know is that it's used all the way back in these chapters of Genesis. And it describes something about God, and it describes something about us when we're like really devoted to Him. And it really brings that whole concept of godliness to life for me. The other place where this word comes up is in Paul's letters. Specifically, not in all of them. They only come up in his personal letters. When he's writing to Timothy or Titus, they're like his proteges, right? When he was writing to these guys, he used this term, this idea of godliness. So whatever this term meant to Paul, it wasn't like a big public thing that he talked about a lot, at least that he never touched on in his letters. It seems like it was more of like an inner concept for him. It was like a personal practice. So let's look at one more place where this term comes up in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 10, verses 2 and 7. It's describing Cornelius, who is like probably a rock-solid, tough Roman soldier. I mean, he was in charge of 100 Roman soldiers. He had probably seen some pretty fierce combat in his time, and he was also devout. It says that he prayed regularly, like at the set times of prayer, every morning, afternoon. He would like go off and he would just pray to God, hey? And I really admire Cornelius, actually. And it says that he was this word, eusebias. He was devout. Like he was really devoted to God. He prayed every day, hey? And the Hebrew term there is he was chasid. Everybody say chasid. He was a Chasid in the sense of he was devoted to God. He practiced godliness. So that's kind of a cool connection there. The whole concept of godliness, it means like somebody who prays every day. That's pretty simple, hey? That's like something on more of a practical level. So that's kind of an overview of this term as it's used in the apostolic scriptures. Let's look at this term now in this parasha. In Genesis chapter 24, if you want to turn to Genesis 24. I need sticky notes for bookmarks so I don't have to like be jumping down every 5 minutes, hey? Yeah, I actually have hundreds of those. I use them when I'm studying. Here, I'll show you actually. This is totally off base, but that's okay because sometimes I'm a little off base. See this? You can see how far I got in the book because it's crammed with yellow sticky notes. So anyway, I love little yellow sticky notes. They're some of my best friends. They help me find stuff when I need to locate information. Okay, so in Genesis 24, verse 12, it's the first time this term comes up in the scriptures. It's when Eliezer is praying as he's going to begin his mission to find Isaac, his perfect bride. He's going to find the one for Isaac. And he says, "O Yahweh, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham." Now, guess what the word for loving kindness there is? Yeah, it's chesed. Can everybody say chesed? It's got the cool scratchy sound. You have to kind of spit on the like the back of the neck of the person in front of you. Chesed. Chesed, yeah. That's the word. So he's saying, please show chesed to my master Abraham. The New American Standard Bible translates that as loving kindness. They actually coined the term. It's a contraction of loving and kindness, right? Stern's translation rendered that word as grace. How does your Bible render it? Any others? Kindness, okay. It's a really big word, and I want to dig into it because I think it's at the heart of who our God is and also who we can be to Him. Okay, like chesed means, it doesn't just mean kindness. I mean, like you can be kind to an animal, right? We want to be kind to everybody, but this is actually a much more special word. Chesed means like, it doesn't even just mean loving kindness, like being a little lovey while you're kind to someone. It has the idea of devotion. Chesed means devotion. And it doesn't mean just like any kind of devotion. It's a covenant term. So if you're in like a serious committed relationship with someone, if you're in a covenant with someone or with the Almighty, then that's where you use this word. It's like a marital term basically, right? Chesed. And it means devotion. Covenant devotion. And this is something cool. Just like He shows chesed to us, like devotion, we can actually show that back to Him. Think about that for a sec. Like when we think of things like grace and loving kindness, like that's stuff that we receive from God, right? He shows us loving kindness and grace, but it's not like we can really show loving kindness or grace to God. Like God doesn't need me to be gracious to Him, you know what I'm saying? Maybe I'm mad sometimes at Him and I need to like get over it and be gracious, but that's not the idea here. The idea is devotion. And what's cool is like, just like God shows devotion to us, that's what we can show back to Him. We can show Him devotion. Maybe that's the only thing that we can like show Him, hey? And like we learned in Cornelius, one way we can do that is just praying every day to Him. I mean, that's so basic, hey? But when it comes to actually practicing it, woo, that's a challenge. I mean, really, like Genevieve and I, we've committed to praying together every morning, right? So we like, one of the first things we do in the morning, after I get a cup of coffee usually, so I can actually wake up a bit, is we pray together. And it's so hard, because I don't want to pray in the morning because I'm tired, or I'm groggy, or I'm grumpy, or whatever, or I just want to get going with my work day, or whatever. You kind of hit the ground running sometimes. And but it's just so cool to think on a practical level that just like He's devoted to us, we can show chesed, we can show that same devotion to Him. We can be someone who practices devotion is a Chasid, right? We just mentioned that. So I'm a Chasid. In the original concept, I'm Hasidic. I'm a Hasidic Jew in the original concept. And each of us, we can be Chasidim. We can be like people who are really devoted to God. That's kind of the idea there. Yeah, you could, it's like He has shown us intense devotion based on our mutually committed relationship. And we can show him that same intense and committed devotion back. Then in 24:27, chapter 24, verse 27, he uses another term. He couples it with the term chesed. It says he's praying again, and he said, "Blessed be Yahweh, the God of my master, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his chesed and his truth toward my master. As for me, Yahweh has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers." So did you notice that? He used the term chesed, and then he coupled it with the term truth. Now, when I use the term truth, what do you think of? In English, it means like the facts. It means reality. It means saying something that's true as compared to saying something that's not true or lying. That's usually how we think about it, right? But we also have another usage of the word also. Let's say in love songs or country songs, when it talks about being true to somebody. It's not talking about being factual or always telling them the truth necessarily. It's more talking about being loyal, right? It's like, I'm going to stick with you. Yeah. And that's the idea behind this word. The Hebrew word is emet. Can we all say emet? Emet. You could spell it E-M-E-T. I have some friends in Saskatoon, and they just had a son, and they named him Emmett because of this word. I thought that's a pretty cool name for a boy. Emmett. It's the Hebrew word for truth, in the sense of like fierce loyalty. Like, you know, someone that you're fiercely loyal to, you have emet to that person. Yeah, it's a cool name. So again, this Hebrew term, also, emet, truth, it's a relational term. It's not a metaphysical term talking about states of reality. It's relational. It's used in the context of a covenant, a mutually committed relationship. So this couplet here, chesed and emet. The Hebrew word and is va, right? So if we wanted to say like chesed and emet, we would say chesed va emet. I'm a Hebrew teacher, so I can't help myself right now. I'm teaching you Hebrew, okay? It's a chesed v'emet. Can you say that after me? Chesed v'emet. Yeah, and it's a beautiful term. You could say that chesed v'emet, the full idea in Hebrew means fierce devotion and loyalty based on a mutually committed relationship, a covenant relationship. That's like chesed and emet. I'm going to tell a story for a second. Like when Jesse and I were first talking in my truck, like the way he talked about Jesse, I was like, wow, he has chesed and emet for Jesse. Like he's fiercely devoted to her. He has like a serious loyalty thing for her, right? And that's an example from like our friendship that I've seen, you know? So these are words that we all show in like our relationships with people and hopefully also our relationship with the Holy One. Here's a really cool poetic usage of this couplet, chesed ve'emet, in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 3. You know the one about like trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, right? Everybody knows that passage in Proverbs 3. But here's the verse directly before it. It says, Proverbs 3:3, don't let chesed and emet leave you. Don't let them leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Isn't that poetic? Like these words for, it's like saying don't let fierce covenant-based devotion and loyalty leave you. Like bind them around your neck, like you'd wear them like a necklace. You know, write them on the tablet of your heart. I mean, that is. Yes, that's right. In Deuteronomy 6, what does it say about the words of Torah? Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be as totafot, frontlets between your eyes. Those are phylacteries. How many of you have seen like Jewish people actually binding tefillin, like wearing the black leather boxes, the phylacteries? Yeah, that's the idea. Actually, that was the next thing I was going to share, Hannah. Like, we're so tracking. Like, the act of binding tefillin, it's best understood in the context of chesed and emet. It's like, it's an act of fierce covenant-based devotion and loyalty. Yeah. There's one other place where this couplet, chesed ve'emet, is used, and it's really meaningful also. John chapter 1, verse 17. It says, for the Torah, the law was given through Moshe, grace and truth were realized through Yeshua the Messiah. Guess what the term there in Hebrew is for grace and truth? Chesed ve'emet. So it's like, that's the gospel. So the Torah, like, you know, God's standards of living, his eternal law, that was given through the hands of Moses. But then, like, the fullness of that actually came alive in our hearts through Yeshua. Like when we begin following Yeshua and committed discipleship, we begin to feel it. Like you begin to feel this devotion to God. There's like this fierce loyalty to the Almighty that just flares up in your soul, hey? And you know what? That's the gospel that the Jewish people need to hear. Because if you're Jewish, sometimes it's just a cultural thing. You grow up doing Jewish stuff, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with God. You can do Shabbat every week. You can do Passover. You don't even have to believe in God to do that stuff in the Jewish world. It's like, yeah, okay, you have the Torah, and that's good. The Torah is true. It is eternal. But it's not enough. Because like that covenant-based devotion, that fierce loyalty to God himself, that only really comes into our hearts through Yeshua when we begin following him as our Savior, as our Rabbi, hey? And that's been my personal experience. It's like Yeshua's the kicker for me. He's the one who really makes this stuff come to life. Like, he's the one why I'm here on Shabbat, why we have a synagogue in Prince Albert. That's our testimony of him. Yeah. Let's talk about love stories for a couple minutes here. Like, this is the best love story, I think, in all of Scripture. Isaac and Rebekah and how they come together. It is so miraculous. Like, Eliezer travels hundreds of miles to the hometown where Abraham came from. The first girl he bumps into happens to be, like, their distant relative, and she's perfect for Isaac. Like, wow, hey? And I mean, you can tell, too, that he was floored. He was literally floored. Twice in the story, like, he just goes down on his face and starts worshiping and praising God because he's blown away, hey? So I really like that. Here's my favorite Hebrew verse from this story in Genesis 26. It's in verse 64. In Hebrew, I'll read it to you in Hebrew and then English, each phrase. It says, Vatisa Rivka et Eineha. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, Vatira et Yitzchak, and saw Isaac, Vatipor me'al hagemal, and fell off the camel. Oh, 24, thanks, Genevieve. It's like, I don't know, there's something about Isaac, like it wasn't just Eliezer getting floored in the story. When Rebekah first saw Isaac, she fell off the camel. It says in Hebrew. It's really funny. It's like, wow, what do you call that? Like he must have been a real knockout or something, I don't know. Yeah, swept right off the camel. So anyway, that's romantic right there. And then
Genesis 26 or verse?
So Genesis 24:64. Yeah. Okay. Here's something cool. This is, I think, especially applicable to, when someone is single and they're looking for their life mate, but it's also true to all of us as, let's say, as husbands and wives, and also as male and female, like just as men and women. We see Isaac doing something in this passage, and we see Rebekah doing something. And I feel like these are two areas where God is maybe calling us to grow also. It's an area that we can focus on. What was Isaac doing in this portion? Let's look at him first. Genesis 24, verse 63. So like Eliezer's gone to go find a bride for Isaac. Can you imagine being Isaac? I would be so nervous. I would be who is he going to bring back? This is suspenseful. He's gone for weeks, and then finally they're coming back. And what is Rebekah doing? I mean, what is Isaac doing? It says that he was walking in the field. He was out in the countryside. He was hiking in the evening. And what was he doing? It says he was meditating. So Isaac was out in the countryside meditating in the evening. Maybe he had gotten his day of work done or whatever. The Hebrew term there is suach. You could say he was suaching. And that word has the concept of like meditating, of thinking deeply, hey? And maybe that's a challenge for all of us men, to take time to contemplate life, to think deeply. If you have a strong work ethic, if you love to work hard, this is a hard one. This is one hard one for me. It's something I've been learning about lately, like actually taking time to stop and think about life on a deeper level. Something Genevieve and I have started doing has really helped in that regard. Every Friday evening before our special Sabbath evening dinner, we like to go for a walk in the country. And sometimes they're short walks, sometimes they're more like hikes, but it gives us time to just get away from everything and just talk about the week. We talk about the past week, we review it, talk about the highs and the lows, talk about things that were like some of the real our favorite things from the week, things we learned. And it's really great for me because seriously, like by Friday, I don't even remember what happened on Sunday. Like it's gone, So I feel like it's really helped me to stay more sane, to stay more in touch with life, and to think more deeply. And I find that it really revives me spiritually too. And hey, that's what Isaac was doing. So, points for Isaac on that one. He was off to a good start. What was Rebecca doing back home? In Genesis 24:16, Rebecca was like doing normal life, really. She was just going out to the well to get water. And how did Eliezer know that Rebecca was the one? Was he like, okay, God, the most beautiful woman who comes out here, that's got to be the one for Isaac, right? Is that what he said? No, he was like, the one who offers to water my camels, like the one who has a servant's heart, the one who's really helpful. She's the one. And sure enough, that's the way it worked, hey? So it's cool that Rebecca was like, she was cultivating a servant's heart. She was like learning how to be a kind person, how to be helpful. I really admire that. That is what Rebecca was focused on. Maybe that's something we can learn too. For those of us who live at home maybe and are single, I don't know if any of us here really applies to any of us, but for younger people in the Messianic community, learn to honor and get along with your parents and family members. As the bride of Messiah, we can learn to serve each other and to serve the world around us. We can learn how to offer the living water, just like Rebecca offered the water to Eliezer. We can offer the living water to a world around us that's dying of thirst. We can learn to work hard, preaching the gospel, making disciples for the Master, and then when the time comes, we'll be taken to Yeshua, our great lover, for the marriage at the culmination of history. Here are two things that, how we've been talking about legacy? Hannah just had a grandchild. I think, man, most of us here have grandchildren already. But we've been talking about praying for our children and grandchildren, like even before we have kids, praying for them maybe years before they're born, right? Just so that when the time comes, we can say, you know what, we've been praying for you. Praying for your great-great-great-great-grandchildren, knowing that God is going to answer those prayers, that could make all the difference in their lives. I want to give you two practical things along those lines, things that we can be praying. The story of Isaac and Rebekah. Wow. I'll share with you something that I see here that we can be praying. Like, their story was a love story that was written by God. Their love story honored the Almighty, it sanctified His name, and it inspired genuine and spontaneous worship in the hearts of those who heard about it. Did you notice that? Like Isaac and Rebekah, they had a miracle story. They told it probably to hundreds of people by the ends of their lives, hey? And look at Eliezer. When he saw what was happening, how miraculous it was, how it honored God, what did he do? He just fell on his face. He was so awestruck, hey? And when we let God write our love stories, that's what it looks like. That's what happens. Yeah. I can see that with Genevieve, how the Father brought us together. And, beautiful times we've had, challenging moments that we've had, and how God's grace has always come through. He's writing our love story. And it's a testimony that we have of Him. We love telling it. We love telling how we met on the mountain of blessing in Israel, It's kind of ironic. I went to Israel with a heart just to work hard and to serve. I went with an all-male work group. And I ended up meeting the girl that I was going to marry, on the mountain of blessing. It's kind of ironic, It's a pretty cool story. So that's something from our lives. But here's something that you can pray for your children. You can pray that their love stories will be written by the Holy One, that their love stories will sanctify His name, they will bring great honor to Him, and that their love stories will inspire genuine and spontaneous worship in the hearts of those who hear about them. Pray that for your great-great-great-grandchildren, that every one of your great-great-great-grandchildren will have a love story like that. Because you know what? That's something that's under fire in our society. And when we pray, it counteracts that satanic assault. Yeah. Oh, that'd be wonderful, Hannah. Okay. Here's another thing that you can be praying for your descendants. I'm big on this right now because, I'm a relatively new father, and I want to learn how to pray into my children's and my, et cetera's lives for a long time. Sorry, I didn't have to say great-great-great-grandchildren. I'll just say et cetera in that instance, right? But it's the blessing that Rebekah's folks gave her as she was, leaving to go get married to Isaac. It's in Genesis 24, verse 60. And I want to break this down with you for a second. Genesis 24:60. It says, they blessed Rivkah, and said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. Excuse me. So they're there are two main elements there that I want to talk about. It's a blessing not just for Rivka, it's a blessing for her descendants. Did you notice that?
Yes.
And when you look at the Hebrew terms for that, wow, they're bigger than what you'd think. Okay, so on a mathematic level, thousands of 10,000s. How many people is that minimal, on a minimum? 1,000 10,000s is 10 million. So thousands of 10,000s is at least 20 million. So they were saying, may your descendants, Rebecca, be at least 20 million people. Like, may you become the matriarch of a nation, is what they were saying. That's a powerful blessing. They were thinking long-term there, weren't they? What would it look like if we began thinking long-term about the legacy that we live on that level? Wow, hey? The second part, may they inherit the gates. May your descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. The Hebrew term there for possess means to inherit or to possess. I love this. Okay, it's like it means to inherit or possess, and the root word there is rosh, which is the Hebrew word for head. What's the connection? It's like it implies headship or leadership. So when it talks about possessing there, it's talking about headship or leadership, okay? What does the gates mean? That's a specific term. It's like the gates in a city, that was where everybody did business, right? That's where the legislation was. So like the gates in Prince Albert is City Hall, right? The gates of our country are in Ottawa. That's the concept of gates here, right? So you could say that the gates were the civic power centers of a region. The gates of a city are a city's political axis and economic hub. That's the idea behind gates. So to inherit the gates of a city means to assume leadership of that city's civic life, to become powerful in that city's political sphere, and to be at the top of that city's economic sector. That's what they were blessing Rebekah's descendants to become. Those who hate them, excuse me, what does that mean? That means anti-Semites and people who hate God. It's like saying, may you always have power over the anti-Semites and haters of God in this world. So here's how I would phrase this. This is something that I'm going to begin praying for my descendants. It's like saying, may your descendants be missional, because you know what? Like if there's someone who hates you in a city, then that's not your city. So you're missional. You're going on a mission to that city. May your descendants be missional. May your descendants become leaders in their communities and wherever they go. And may your descendants number in the millions. Wow. What if we started praying for each other like that? What if we started praying for our children and grandchildren every Erev Shabbat, every Friday evening? Like, wow, hey, I'm starting to get in that groove, and it's powerful. I'm realizing that like we're the beginning of something great that is going to last for so many generations. And I want to take a minute to just pray that for all of you here, and for us as a community, for the Messianic Jewish community on a whole. Here's the prayer that I composed. May your descendants be aggressively missional and outreach-minded. May your descendants assume leadership in the civic life of their cities and countries. May your descendants become powerful in the political spheres of their cities and countries. May your descendants be at the top of the economic sectors of their cities and countries. May your descendants always have power over the anti-Semites and enemies of God in this world. And may your physical and spiritual descendants number in the hundreds of millions. Who can say amen to that?
Is that what you used to do?
No, I composed that.
It's wonderful.
Thank you. I'm trying to break down the idea of this blessing for you, right? And you wonder, why are the Jewish people historically such movers and shakers? Why do they often turn up at the higher levels of society? Well, now you know why. It's built into the spiritual DNA of the people of Israel, because they study the Torah, because they practice the Torah, because they understand the power of a parent's and a grandparent's and a great-grandparent's blessing. That's why. Start praying for your children and blessing them every Friday evening, every Erev Shabbat, and man, a couple of generations, they are going to be breaking out like you wouldn't believe and impacting the world. And that's what we want. Let's turn back to 2 Peter now. That was our look at the parsha this week. Here's something really practical I just wanted to touch on. In 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 8, he talks about a list of qualities that if they're theirs, and if they're ours, and if we're growing in them, then he says, like, they're not going to make you useless or unfruitful in the true knowledge of our Master Yeshua the Messiah. So it's like he's saying, if you're growing in these areas, then you're going to become fruitful, like productive and useful for God, and in bringing people to know Yeshua, hey? And I just wanted to point out that, man, like Simon Peter was a really good pragmatic Jew in saying that. He was talking about being useful, about being productive in the knowledge of Yeshua, hey? What I get out of that is that there's a focus that can cause us to be fruitful and productive in terms of reaching the world around us and making disciples. Inversely, it's also true that there are many, many focuses that will cause us to be unfruitful and unproductive in terms of reaching the world around us and making disciples. And I think it's important to differentiate as we encounter different ideas and different emphases between focuses that are productive and focuses that aren't productive in terms of bringing people to Yeshua, helping people to know Him better. There's a lot of stuff out there that can end up being distracting and can end up making us unfruitful in terms of bringing people to Yeshua. And hey, there are even some things that go under the Messianic label that can sometimes be like that. Okay, so let's look here in our final section at the Jewish eschatology in 2 Peter, in terms of the end of days, how Peter saw some of these things. In chapter 1, verse 19, he says to pay attention to something, and this is what he compares it to. He compares it to like a light shining in a dark place. So I brought my Makita light to exemplify that. I kind of wish it was dark in here. It would be a lot more useful, hey? But the idea is, he said the Holy Scriptures, they're like the light that's shining in a dark place. I'm going to be careful not to like shine this in your eyes because it's a pretty good beam. But anyway, you can imagine, let's say, being out in the middle of a forest, a really dark forest, and you're totally lost, or maybe you have a map and you know, like, there's a path, but you can't even see your way. Hey, there we go. Thanks, Mike. I really want to shine this in your eyes, actually, because I don't know, you just have this impulse when you have a light to be like, ha ha ha, but I'm not going to. I wonder how that would look in the camera. I'll shine it in the camera because our live streaming audience, it's not going to hurt them. How does that look? There we are. I'll go back and check the recording and see how that did. But anyway, all right, beaming down. But that's the picture that he gives for the Holy Scriptures. It's like when you're in a dark night and you're disoriented and you can't see where to go, when you get in the Word, when you get in the prophetic element of the Word, it's like your flashlight, right? It's like you're lost and you can't see where you're going, and when you connect with the Word, it's like flicking on the flashlight, and all of a sudden you can navigate, you can see where you're going, hey? And then he said, the ultimate goal is then the sun rises, which is when we really get to know Yeshua, when he comes back. And that's like the morning star appearing, the day dawning. That's a very beautiful poetic description too. Leave that there for now. Hey, thanks, Mike. Next time we'll have to put sheets over all of the skylights in here, and then we can make it really dark for the illustration. I'll call you guys up. You can come early and get up on the roof and do that. Yeah, right. Right. Okay. I'll remember that, Wayne. So he says here, that's the prophetic word. Now, what prophetic word is he talking about? What was the Bible that Peter read? It was the Hebrew Bible, what's commonly called the Old Testament, right? He's saying to pay attention to the things in there. Think about that. Who are some of the prophets? Abraham, it says, he was a prophet. So Abraham is included in these prophets. Moses, the author of the Torah, he was the foremost of the prophets of Israel. So in that regard, the whole Torah is part of the prophetic word that Peter was saying, let's pay really close attention to this, hey? Here's a principle from Isaiah, chapter 46, verse 10. It says that God declares the end from the beginning. The Hebrew there says, Magid, Reshit, Me'acharit. He declares the end from Genesis. So the book of Genesis has some very strong prophetic elements in it that tell us about the end of days, that tell us about the culmination of history, that describe the Messianic era, even when Yeshua comes back. Sometimes I think certain elements in the Tanakh, like in the Hebrew Bible, I don't think they get as much airtime. Maybe because the eschatology they communicate is uncomfortably pro-Israel in terms of the end of days return to the people of Israel to the land of Israel, where we will live, reinstated in the land of Israel throughout the Messianic era. I think maybe the eschatology, like the prophetic element in the Hebrew Bible, it might also be uncomfortably too pro-Torah for most people, in that it repeatedly prophesies an end of days revival in which we return to God's Torah and begin practicing His commandments and keeping the laws of the Old Testament. Oh my, keeping the laws of the Old Testament. It prophesies that's going to happen in the end of days. That is going to be the biblical revival, according to Deuteronomy 30, that happens in the end of days. With all our heart and soul. And you know what? Like, massive return of the people of Israel to the land of Israel, like a revival in which the people of God, the body of Messiah, return to the Torah and begin practicing stuff from the Old Testament. That just does not fit into most people's worldview of the future. And I think maybe that's why sometimes the Tanakh doesn't get as much airtime when we talk about eschatology. I think a lot of times, like, the Jewish people and the Torah are irrelevant at best to a lot of people, sometimes even hated. So, like, what often do we do? Sometimes we skip the prophetic elements of the Tanakh and we just stick to the book of Revelation, which unfortunately makes no sense when it's removed from its context in the greater body of prophetic revelation communicated in the Tanakh. Have you noticed that? Like, Revelation gets a ton of airtime in the prophetic world, let's say on, I don't know, some big Christian TV station, and like the rest of the prophetic element of the Bible gets almost no attention. And Revelation makes no sense if you take it out of the context of the rest of the Bible. It's like it's totally up for grabs. You can make it say anything. Maybe that's why sometimes the whole prophetic world is such a gong show. If we took the book of Revelation and we put it back into the context of the Torah, I think it would begin to make some more sense. It would be more consistent. Okay, here's an example. Can you tell me what the one thing is that Shimon said not to be ignorant of? He said there's one thing we're not to be ignorant of. I remember someone asked me this about 8 years ago, and I was like, man, I grew up hearing the Bible like all the time. My dad was a preacher. I don't know how many times I've read through 2 Peter, and I don't have a clue. Like, it's funny actually, hey? It's like, Simon Peter said to be ignorant, not to be ignorant of one thing, and it's the one thing I don't remember, right? Well, here, I'll tell you what it is. It's in 2 Peter chapter 3, and he said not to be ignorant of a principle. He said not to be ignorant of a principle. Actually, I'll give you the verse here too. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. He said, don't be ignorant of the principle taught by Moses, like the Moses who wrote the Torah, in Psalm 90, verse 4, that with Yahweh a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. That's the thing he said, like, make sure you don't like overlook this fact. Why? Why did he say that? Well, he's talking in the context of eschatology here, Jewish eschatology, referencing a psalm that Moses wrote. Here's something interesting. Based on this concept of a day in 1,000 years, the Jewish sages and the apostles inferred from this passage that just like the week has 7 days, the week of creation has 7 days, there would be 7,000 year days of world history, with the final millennial day being the reign of Messiah on earth. So you have like 6 work days, and then you get to take it easy and rest on Shabbat, and it's a beautiful time. Correlatively, the Jewish sages of old said, okay, so that means there's going to be 6,000 years of world history, and then Messiah is going to come, and there's going to be like the Messianic era. The term we would use from Revelation is like the 1,000-year reign of Christ, right? Wow. That's in Revelation too. That isn't just traditional Jewish eschatology. The 1,000-year reign of Christ. That's like a patently Jewish eschatological concept. Here, I'm going to read you two short passages. One is from an early Christian source, another is from an early Jewish source. I'm going to read you something from the book of Barnabas. Now, Barnabas is not scripture. The early sages had very good reasons for not including the book of Barnabas in the New Testament, but it was something that was read widely in the 100s, and it does help us to understand how believers thought, how some believers thought back then. So that's why I want to share this with you. It's interesting on that level, more of a scholastic level. In Barnabas chapter 15, he references this idea, and he says, "The Sabbath is mentioned at the beginning of the creation, and God made in 6 days the works of his hands, and made an end on the seventh day, and rested on it and sanctified it. Attend, my children, to the meaning of this expression, he finished in 6 days. This implies that the Lord will finish all things in 6,000 years. For a day is with him 1,000 years. And he himself testifieth, saying, Behold, today will be as 1,000 years. Therefore, my children, in 6 days, that is in 6,000 years, all things will be finished. And he rested on the seventh day. This means when his Son, coming again, shall destroy the time of the wicked man and judge the ungodly." Wow. So did you hear that? There was an element in the early church that believed the same thing that Simon Peter was talking about here, which is a Jewish idea. This is also in the Talmud, like in the traditional Jewish literature. This is a fascinating passage because it talks about how Jewish people thought Messiah was going to come about 2,000 years ago and why they thought that. Get this. It's in Sanhedrin 97a. It has been taught in accordance with Rabbi Katina. Just as the seventh year is 1 year of release in 7. So you know what he's talking about there, right? Like in Israeli agriculture, every 7th year you let the land lie fallow, summer fallow. You give it a rest, right? It's called the year of release, the Shnat HaShemitah. So he's saying it's been taught in accordance with Rabbi Katina. Just as the 7th year is 1 year of release in 7, so is the world. 1,000 years out of 7 shall be fallow, as it is written, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. And it is further said, a psalm and song for the Sabbath day, meaning the day that is altogether Sabbath. Maybe you've heard the Hebrew term before, Yom Shekulo Shabbat. It means like a day that is altogether Shabbat. It's in a famous Messianic Jewish song. Anyway, meaning the day that is altogether Sabbath, and it's also said, for 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past. Okay, this is the kicker right here. The Tanakh of Elijah teaches, the world is to exist 6,000 years. In the first 2,000, there was desolation. That was like in the early 2000 when the world was in a state of relative anarchy. Then for 2,000 years, the Torah flourished. That began around Abraham. Abraham taught people God's Torah. He brought them to faith. And the next 2,000 years is the Messianic era. But through our many iniquities, all these years have been lost. So did you get that? From Abraham until when Yeshua came was about 2,000 years. So they were saying that final 2,000 years was supposed to be the Messianic era, but because of our sins, Messiah never showed up. Now let me ask you, was it true that Messiah never showed up on schedule to inaugurate the days of Messiah, or was it true that because of our sins, some of us didn't come to faith in him or recognize him? Maybe that's more the case. Yeah. So isn't that interesting? Traditional Jewish source says Messiah was supposed to come 2,000 years, and he never showed. Wow, hey? Yeah, here's the footnote in the Talmud of that passage. He should have come at the beginning of the last 2,000 years. The delay is due to our sins. Woo. Wow. That, again, I'll give you the reference for that, because if you're ever in a conversation with a Jewish person, that's a powerful verse. Traditional Judaism teaches in Sanhedrin 97a that Messiah was supposed to come 2,000 years ago. Yeah. Maybe he did. Anyway, that's like the historical background to Shimon Kefa saying not to be ignorant of the principle, this principle that was taught by Moses. Okay. He leaves us with a practical conclusion here. It's like based on one more prophecy. In Isaiah 65, the Almighty says that he's going to like create a new heavens and a new earth, hey? And the Hebrew term there for create, a new heavens and a new earth, it's the same word for the new moon, when the moon renews itself. That's actually going to happen on Sunday evening. Like, get out and watch the western horizon on Sunday evening, and you'll see that first little sliver of the, quote, new moon. Now let me ask you, is that a brand new moon? Like one that never existed before? Or is it the same moon, but it's renewing itself? Yeah, it's renewing itself, right? It's chadash, it's new. Well, that's the same word for the new heavens and the new earth. And Simon Peter says this is a promise that we are watching for. He says we are watching for the new heavens and the new earth in which righteousness dwells. And the passage he's quoting here, Isaiah 65, the context here is God renewing the city of Jerusalem. Wow, hey? Okay, I'll tell you one story about that here. In 2 Peter chapter 3, he talks about like the new heavens and the new earth, but he also talks about how there's going to be some massive destruction before that happens, like major meltdown, like, I don't know. What movies kind of would really communicate that idea? Like global meltdown, basically. Armageddon, okay. Maybe a scenario kind of like that, right? And nuclear war, yeah, something like that maybe. They have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the whole Earth, like totally destroy the entire planet several times over, hey? Anyway, Simon Peter says some stuff like that's going to happen before God renews the heavens and the earth and makes everything right again. And my buddies and I used to have some buddies in Roster, and we were really tight. I would hitchhike up there like every weekend and spend time with them, and we had a lot of fun. And we read that passage, and it was like really useful sometimes. We were really into vehicles, like we loved nice cars, so we would like sit there and ogle nice cars when they went past, right? And then we read this passage, and we were like, hey, everything's going to burn in the end. So we started like, whenever we'd see nice cars or something, we'd be like, wow, that's a nice car. And then we'd be like, it's going to burn. It's all going to burn. And that was like, that kind of helped us stay focused on what's really important and not just, maybe becoming too materialistic or whatever. So you can include that in your like, your liturgy, your daily liturgy. It's all going to burn. Just say that every now and then. Remind you if it's really important. I'm kind of joking, right? But maybe there's an idea there. So here's Simon Peter's conclusion in chapter 3, verse 17. He says, "Be on your guard so that you aren't carried away by the error of unprincipled men and fall away from your own steadfastness." He's like giving people a warning that there's some stuff in Paul's letters that's really hard to understand. People who distort the scriptures, like twist them, they do that with Paul's letters too. So people who take the Torah and twist it, maybe by saying things like it's all spiritual now when the Torah doesn't apply on a physical, literal level anymore. If people do that, it's going to be really easy to make a mess of Paul's letters too and misinterpret them. So he gives a warning, and then he says, so be on guard against errors like this. And then in 3 verse 14, he gives him the other practical application. He says, therefore, beloved, since you're looking for these things, like the new heavens and the new earth, like everything burning in the process, be diligent to be found by him in shalom. So that's what he brings it down to. And shalom is a relational term too. So it's like he's saying, okay, if you're expecting this stuff to happen, like get along with each other until then.
Thank you for joining us in this message. I pray that it's been an inspiration to you in your discipleship to Yeshua the Messiah. Crown of Messiah is a relatively small congregation with a massive mission. We're not just making disciples and teaching the Word of God here in our city. We're also doing that internationally through vehicles such as the internet. It is our joy to offer you these messages for free at absolutely no charge. At the same time, we do have ongoing overhead expenses. It costs us something to produce these teachings and get them out to you. And we would appreciate it if you would, in turn, support our work in a practical way. Help us cover some of our basic expenses. You can do that by going to our website, crownofmessiah.com, and going to the donate page, where you can make a one-time donation or you can set up a monthly automated donation. I'm reminded of the words of Yeshua's apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 6. He said, let the one who is taught the word share everything good with his teacher. So if you're being taught the word by us, we would appreciate it if you would take the words of Yeshua's apostle seriously and make some type of return for the blessing that we are giving you for free. That way, we'll all be in it together, and we will be a team accomplishing the mission that Yeshua has given us. And you will go from only being a receiver to also being a giver. If you're like most people, finances are tight. We understand that. Finances are tight for us too. That's why we need people like you to come alongside us and to back us in the work that Yeshua has called us to do. Thank you so much for making that donation at crownofmessiah.com, and thank you for becoming a team member with us. We appreciate it.